Hello and welcome to Business Insider with Mario Toneguzzi on Calgary's Business. Joining me today is Michael Holden, who is VP of Policy and Chief Economist for the Business Council of Alberta. Thanks for joining us today, Mike.
Thank you.
All right, so just recently you folks put out a survey of CEOs in Alberta, some of the top CEOs, and their thinking of what's happening right now in the province economically. Tell me what the key results were from that survey from your standpoint.
Sure. So what we did with our survey was we wanted to get a look at what our members and other large businesses and leading companies in Alberta, how they were dealing with the COVID-related economic shutdown and associated and the oil price crash at the same time. Try to get their perspective on what the government response was to date, and also, and probably most importantly, about now that we're hitting the recovery or the relaunch stage and looking towards economic recovery, what their expectations for that recovery were going forward. And so, I think that in terms of what the big findings were from there, I think nothing was a huge surprise in terms of what the impact had been. A lot of companies were experiencing tremendous losses in the loss of revenues, job cuts across many businesses. But I think the most interesting part for us was what the future holds and what it looks like. And so some of the main findings that surprised me were about a quarter of businesses said that they weren't 100% sure that they were going to survive this crisis even now. And so, that's not to say that 25 or 1 in 4 businesses is on death's doorstep. It's simply a case that they don't have 100% solid certainty that they're going to be able to move forward. And the other main finding, I think, too, is that it's going to be a long road to recovery. We saw that in some of the survey responses, and in particular, that stood out with a question we asked about rehiring workers that had been laid off. And so, we had, I think, only about 18% said that they would rehire them back. About 13% expected additional layoffs, and the majority said that they weren't. 18% said they would not hire any back that had been laid off. 31% said they would hire only some of them back, and 13% said that they would probably be doing additional layoffs. So I think all that points to a long road to recovery, and so we're not going to be snapping back to what we saw pre-COVID anytime soon.
So what did they say in terms of what were the top 3 or the top things that they've done to survive at this stage?
Well, I mentioned a couple of them. The first one was canceling contracts and some work that they had planned on the go. There were a number related to reducing labor costs. Businesses said that they had, as I said, 61% had laid off workers. More than half had reduced the number of hours that their workers were working, or implemented pay cuts. So there were a lot on the labor side. And then, canceling capital spending, canceling new contracts, as I said, and even R&D spending. So they're cutting costs any way they can to try to get through this.
Do you think this episode and this recession is going to force them to look at their business models going forward and how they operate into the future?
Yeah, I do, in a couple of different ways. First of all, they're going to have to adapt to whatever the new post-COVID normal is, and so that requires changing how businesses operate, how offices operate, how construction sites or whatever your business happens to be. So that's one side of it. And the second is, businesses that have been forced to lay workers off or have shut down production are going to be looking at how they can they survive doing the things the way they have been doing them over the last couple of months in future. Like, is there a need to have as many workers physically present in the office? Do we need to, what are businesses spending money on? Is there a need to shift to more online work? I think that a lot of businesses, and it'll depend from industry to industry, but I think there will be a lot of adjustments and a lot of new information, both good and bad, has come out of the last 2, 3, or 4 months. And so I think businesses will be looking at that and trying to learn and adapt.
Okay. Did those CEOs discuss government programs at this time? So those support programs that are in place, and how they felt about them, and whether they're tapping into those?
Yeah, so we asked about how businesses viewed the federal and provincial responses, and there was a bit of a gap in there. I think that about 34% of businesses. So we asked them to rank it on a scale of 1 to 5. 1 being very poor and 5 being excellent. And so for the federal government, about 34% of respondents said that gave them a 4 or a 5 ranking, and for the provincial government, it was over 60, I believe. And so to us, I mean that. So obviously, the people view the provincial government response more favorably. I think that a large part of the reason for that, though, is because of where businesses and people in general see the burden of responsibility falling, and that is specifically on. I mean, this is a national crisis, a national economic shutdown, and people appropriately see the federal government as being the one that has the responsibility and the fiscal firepower to do this. So you're in a position to be more critical of the federal government right out of the gate, and so I think that's something that we see reflected in there. We did ask a question about the uptake of various programs. It's difficult to distill information out of that because not all companies are eligible for all programs. But we did find that the wage subsidy program is the one that is by far the most commonly used by everybody. And so there had been some media reports about the federal government being surprised at how at the uptake being not as high as they thought it might otherwise be. But we found from our survey results that the uptake was actually not too bad. And then we asked the question we asked about the large employers program, the LEAF program, which was the most recent one to come out, and that came out just at the time that our survey was out in the field, and so there wasn't a lot of information available on the program at the time. But our indication from our survey results were that uptake of that doesn't look like it's going to be very high.
Okay. Now, we've talked in this province and this city quite a bit over the years about diversifying the economy, and not having it so reliant on the oil and gas industry, which has been our bread and butter forever. um, what do you think this current episode, with COVID, how does that play into diversifying the economy? Is it a tougher time right now to maybe head in that direction, or?
It's, the whole issue of diversifying the economy is, I mean, it's been around since, like, I was born and raised in Edmonton, and from my childhood on, this has been the subject that everybody always talks about, and they usually talk about it when the energy sector is struggling and not when it's doing well.
Yeah.
I think that there's a couple of things, I guess. One is that this whole relaunch and recovery stage provides us with a unique opportunity. It's kind of the silver lining here to build. If we're going to build and rebuild the province, we can build it into something better and build it into something that what we want it to be, and have a look at what that is.
Yeah.
And so we're doing some work in that area on, we need to enable more technology and innovation in the province, not just to create a tech industry, but because that's the future of competitiveness in all of our industries. We do need to work on attracting new businesses and creating an attractive investment climate, and we need to make sure that we have the people and the skills in the province that are needed to work here, and that also to provide them with the opportunity they need. So there are a lot of opportunities. I think that diversifying is important, but we have to diversify based on our strengths. We can't, and I mean, the fastest way to diversify the Alberta economy is to shut down the energy sector. If you do that, suddenly we look like a pretty diversified province, and it's only because energy is so big that we appear to be so undiversified. So, it has to come through growth and not at the expense of the energy sector in order for it to count for anything.
Okay, super. Thanks a lot for joining us today, Mike.
Thank you.
That was Michael Holden, VP of Policy and Chief Economist with the Business Council of Alberta. This has been Business Insider with Mario Toneguzzi on Calgary's Business. Thanks for joining us today.